Hello, my name is John Fortner, and welcome to my research presentation, where I will be talking about the effects of the Shanghai Household Waste Management Regulation in 2019. Okay, so to start off with the research question itself, what effect has the implementation of the Shanghai Household Waste Management Regulation of 2019 had on Shanghai residents' everyday lives? And what impact has the law had on the environmental issue, which is excess waste, that it was intended to address? So I ended up with this question after a few iterations, but I felt that it was good to give the policy a more holistic approach while giving myself the flexibility to talk about the wider umbrella of authoritarian environmentalism in which this policy is, as well as talking more about the policy as a whole so that people can have a better understanding of the wider effects of the policy rather than just a specific thing that the policy did. So as for the broader significance of this project, this recycling law is a recent example of China's general push toward authoritarian environmentalism. So examining the effects of the policy in the context of both civilian perception and environmental impact provides information that can be used to evaluate the value of this of authoritarian environmentalism as a whole, as well as of the specific policy at hand. And this project aims to focus on those two significant realms of the effects of this policy in order to give a more holistic representation of the policy that can be used for a more nuanced, informed discussion about the value of this policy and of authoritarian environmentalism as a principle and as a movement. So as for some background on how the policy came to be, China has long been criticized for its place as the country with the largest production of pollutants in the world. So it's got a long history of environmental reform. In 1983, the government announced that environmental protection would become a state policy. And in 1998, after a series of floodings, the state founded the State Environmental Protection Administration to have a more focused effort on environmental policy. Later on in 2014, President Xi Jinping attended the opening of the National People's Congress and declared war on pollution. And after 2 years of debate in 2016, the Congress approved new environmental law that increased government insight of pollution and waste. And on July 1st, 2019, the Shanghai Household Waste Management Regulation went into effect in Shanghai after it had been approved in January of the same year. It was put in place because Shanghai is the most significant producer of trash in China, producing 9 million metric tons of China's 210 million tons per year. So as for the details of the policy itself, the law established that waste be divided into 4 categories, which were wet waste, sometimes referred to as food waste, hazardous waste, recyclable waste, and dry waste, sometimes referred to as residual. And failure to organize waste correctly would be punished in the form of substantial fines of 50 to 200 yuan for individuals, and greater fines for companies, which range from 5,000 to 50,000 yuan. This is according to the Global Legal Monitor found in the Library of Congress. And more significant offenses even have the threat of decreases in social credit rating, which is extremely important in China, as it has a substantial impact on the ability to obtain jobs, private education, and in more egregious cases, even access to flights or certain public websites. The law also had an effect on hotels, as they were forced to not provide disposable products to guests without being specifically asked for them. And even when those products were requested, they still had to meet certain environmental standards. So this law placed a significant burden on both civilians and on businesses like hotels. So as for the public impact following the bill, prior to the bill and after its implementation, the Chinese government sponsored information sessions and provided information about how to sort waste, such as online and in person in different areas. But many people continued to complain that the rules were unclear, citing instances like the distinction between different animal bones. Bones from some animals would be considered dry waste because they would be very difficult to break down, whereas other bones could be considered wet waste. It just depended on criteria that some people would find arbitrary. which made it a lot harder to engage in sorting. So in the week following the implementation of the law, hundreds of police officers reportedly were sent across the city to deliver rectification notices and fines. So the strict rules and swift implementation of punishments forced people to take great care in dealing with their waste, some people even being forced to wash or disassemble certain products to properly organize them into the different bins. And in areas that share community waste, there has also been a significant amount of community pressure to conform to the rules in order to avoid punishment for the group. So for the public response, most of this comes from BBC. The popular microblogging website Sina Weibo saw a mixed commentary on the regulations, which seems to be a running theme. Many people reportedly praised the program for its positive environmental impact, but tens of thousands also used this hashtag dividing rubbish soon sends Shanghai citizens crazy in a way to express their distress in figuring out how to sort and prepare their trash properly. The hashtag was pretty soon banned from the platform. So this law also led to the propagation of a number of memes and some viral videos. In the top right, you'll see some clips from a video that had gone viral discussing how some items may be wet but considered dry, or dry but considered wet, just based on, again, criteria that some people would find unintuitive or just ironic. And according to a report by the news agency Citations, different generations had a different response to this policy. So young people aged 20 to 35 have been the least compliant with the policies, while the older generation has been leading the charge. And they cited some possible reasons for this, most especially that many young people are working a 6-day work week from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and were less likely to be given information due to the fact that a lot of notices were being handed out or information being provided during those hours when people weren't at home. So this law falls under the wider umbrella of Authoritarian Environmentalism, which is a general descriptor of China's unusual top-down environmentalist policy. So a study published in March 2020 by Hao Wang and Chengxu Jiang supported the observation that while certain localities exhibited a strong initiative in promoting household waste sorting, the policymaking process behind local household waste sorting decrees is generally non-transparent, non-participatory, and originating in the central government. So this lack of public influence is pretty unusual in the modern world because most environmentalism and environmentalist movements arise as the result of bottom-up movements in democratic countries. So policy created under the system of authoritarian environmentalism, as the study provided in a distinction, these policies tend to demand civic engagement only at the implementation level rather than at the stage of creating the policy itself, and focused more on how to sort waste rather than why to engage in that activity. So as for the actual environmental impact of the policy, I'm going to be citing the news agency China Daily, which I want to clarify real quick, is endorsed by the Chinese Communist Party and often takes editorial positions that promote state propaganda. So it's considered a questionable source on the media bias checker that I used. But I couldn't find, most news sources didn't have real stats on the environmental impact, and it seemed to be directly quoting the mayor of Shanghai, Ying Yang, so I decided to go ahead and use these stats anyway. Okay, so the mayor reportedly cited the following statistics. 90% of the city's residential quarters had achieved the stipulated standards by the end of 2019. Compared with 2018, the average amount of recyclables, kitchen waste, and hazardous waste collected daily in 2019 increased by 431.8%, 88.8%, and 504.1% respectively. And most importantly, the percentage of trash buried in landfills from the city reduced from 41.4% prior to the policy to just 20% by the end of the year, which is a significant decrease in the amount of waste going to landfills and suggests that much more of the waste is being recycled or disposed of in a more appropriate manner based on the category to which it belonged. So overall, at least the mayor of Shanghai considered the program to be a great success, and the stats do seem to back up that the policy had a significant and direct impact on the disposal of waste from the city. So initially, I intended to focus my research on how this specific policy in Shanghai was perceived by the public. But I quickly found that accessing public opinion polls in China is difficult, and I also decided that without providing more detail about the impact of the policy, I would be giving less than a holistic image of the policy and would end up creating a certain bias in the way that it was understood. So I wanted to make sure that I covered more holistically the policy by covering both its impact on civilians and how those people responded to the policy, and also on its impact on the environment. And then I wanted to sort of bring that together by talking more broadly about how it fits and how this policy fits into the wider umbrella of authoritarian environmentalism, so that it could be used as an example of a broader movement that has a lot of significance in our world, both in China and internationally. And that way it could help create a dialogue about whether these kinds of policies are effective or good for China and for the rest of the world. So I think the most significant challenge that I encountered in doing my research was that a lot of news sources in China are extremely biased in favor of the Communist Party due to the fact that China has a very low freedom of press rating. So I had to use a source from China Daily in talking about the environmental impact of the policy, which is endorsed by the CCP and tends to have editorial pieces that openly promote the state. Another source I used was Sixth Tone, which didn't have an entry on the fact checker I was using, but I went on a lot of social media forums, and most people seem to agree that it was more neutral than China Daily, but still had a subtle leaning in favor of the state. So the issue of media bias is, of course, a concern everywhere, but I found that with Chinese news sources in particular, it was much more extreme. The only real credible sources I seem to find in China were based in Hong Kong, and they tended not to they all lacked coverage of the specific topic that I was focused on, so I wasn't able to make use of those. But I think I did the best with what I could. So overall, the public response to the policy has been pretty mixed, with the common attitude seeming to be a reluctant acceptance. But a lot of the distress caused by the policy has been the result of confusion about the intricacies of how to sort the garbage, as well as disgruntlement about how to properly disassemble or wash the products before throwing them away. But these are issues that naturally reduce over time. And with the efforts of companies that provide apps and services to these people, as well as just naturally learning better how to sort their garbage over time, these issues will become less prominent in the future and will sort of decline as this policy ages. And overall, the policy does seem to have contributed to a decrease in unnecessary use of landfills and an increase in recycling, making it effective at fulfilling its original purpose. So as I continue to do research on this topic, I think I've gotten a strong base, but I do think I want to spend more time going into more detail about how it affected different groups in society based on things like age or class, as I hadn't realized that it would have such a distinct effect based on those two things. But some of the articles I found talked more significantly about how there was a large generational divide in the attitude toward the policy. And I also want to try to find different information about the environmental impact that the policy had, as I felt like I wasn't able to go into as much detail as I would have liked, at least not so far. And I also want to explore further how this law fits into the broader scope of authoritarian environmentalism, and how the authoritarian environmentalist principles influence the way that the policy was created and implemented. These are my citations. Thank you very much for sticking through to the end, and I look forward very much to hearing your feedback. That's all.